Okay, so today we are talking about how to actually improve your overall impact score and get your R01 funded. So if you're new here, if this is the first one of these videos that you're watching, I'm Sarah Dobson. I am a research grant consultant and I help primarily early career researchers get their research funded at NIH. And so today we're going to talk about that situation where you have a grant that you are resubmitting and you're wanting to improve that overall impact score. So if you're in the scenario where your grant was not discussed the first time, you don't even have an impact score. So getting an impact score is obviously going to be a huge improvement, right? But we're also talking about the PIs who had an impact score last time. It just wasn't really in the fundable range, and they're trying to improve it so they can get it into a position to be funded. And that's actually exactly who we work with in our strategic grant review service. And what I'm going to do today is actually walk you through that process of how we help our clients, our PIs, get fundable scores based on sort of a middle of the road overall impact score on their previous grant. And we've had huge success with this. So more than 80% of our clients receive a fundable score after they work with us. And so the process that we've developed around this, we think is pretty robust and pretty successful. So let me walk you through exactly how we do that. So the very first thing that we start with when we're working with a PI is to do what we call a resubmission strategy session. And that's where we take the summary statement from their previous application and we go through it pretty much line by line. And we look at all of those critiques and we ask the PI, do you agree or do you disagree with this critique? And we can get really good information either way. So if the PI agrees with the critique, then they know exactly what they need to do to make improvements to refine their application for next time. But if they disagree, we can have a really rich discussion about why they disagree, why they're doing things the way that they're doing them and not the way that their reviewer is suggesting that they do them. And then we can help them come up with a plan to better clarify or justify the reason that they're doing it the way that they're doing it, right? So that's how we approach that first phase of work with our PIs, is with that resubmission strategy session and going through that summary statement line by line and really making a plan, right? So at the end of that sort of 60 to 90 minute conversation, we have a plan. We know what we need to do on our end to improve the grantsmanship. And the PI knows what they need to do on their end to improve the scientific merit. Right? And so this is something that you can do on your own with your research team, with other colleagues who are willing to participate in the feedback process. Or of course, you're more than welcome to come and work with us, of course, on your next resubmission. We're happy to do that. But I'm going to walk you through the full process that we go through, just so you can understand what you can incorporate into your own process for resubmission. And then if you do want to work with us, I can give you some information about that at the end. So, okay, so we've got the resubmission strategy session. Everybody has a plan. We know what we're doing. Then about 8 weeks out from the internal institutional deadline where you have to have all your ducks in a row, you have to have all the documents kind of locked and loaded before submitting to NIH, that's when we start our actual review process with our clients. And so what we do in that review process is we look at their grant from two main perspectives over two different rounds of review. So in that first round of review, what we do is really take a look at the big picture. So what's the overall argument that the PI is making for why this research ought to be funded, why they have the right team in place to do the work, and why their project is feasible. And so what we do based on that assessment from our side, and of course the information that we have from the summary statement, we go through and we make recommendations about how to make that argument stronger. And that might include, moving things around, reorganizing parts of the significance section, for example, or even reorganizing how the approach section is structured, just to make that more clear and easier for reviewers to grasp. And so in our experience, doing that work at the big picture level is really what makes the biggest difference, because what you're addressing there is really about clarity. So what you're always trying to accomplish is for your reviewers to really have sort of a mental picture of the project that you're proposing, right? And one of the best ways to do that is to present it as clearly and logically and simply as you possibly can. So that's really what we're doing in that first round of review is getting that big picture impression nailed down as well as we possibly can. And so again, we'll provide a bunch of recommendations in the margins of the documents that the PI sends us. And then we send it back to the PI, and there's a good chunk of time in between, usually kind of 2 to 3 weeks, where the PI makes those changes in consultation with their research team, makes the changes that we recommend to the overall structure of the application. Some of the other things that we do in that early stage are looking at strategy. So were you in the right study section last time around? Usually if you got a good score but not a great score, you're probably in the right study section, but there may still be questions around that we would discuss with the PI. So it's really about structure and strategy and that overall sort of logical argument. Then when we get into that second round of review, once the PI has made those refinements based on our recommendations, actually the very first thing we do is we go back to that big picture. We take one more look at the overall impression that the grant is presenting, and we see if there are any more tweaks or changes that we can make in that overall argument. And the reason that we do that first is because now we can look at it once the PI has made those recommended changes. So there have been some adjustments, and we just see if there are any additional adjustments that can be made. Because again, in our experience, that's what makes the biggest difference in terms of clarity, is the overall structure that you're using. So once we've done that, then we go into sort of a deeper level of detail. We get into the sentence level, and this is more traditionally what you would consider copy editing. So we look at how clear the sentences are, we look at whether you've labeled your tables and figures appropriately, and we try to also edit for page length. If you're going a little bit over page length, we try to tighten things up there. So that is part of the second round of review, and the reason that this happens in the second round is because it's a lot more efficient to do it that way, right? If you're making all of those little changes in the first go through of your application, but then you end up, say, removing an entire paragraph, you've just wasted your time tinkering with your sentences in a paragraph that ultimately doesn't make it into the grant, right? So that's why we do that in the second round. It's just really for efficiency's sake. So that's what happens in that second round. We're looking more at clarity and cohesion and doing some fine tuning before the PI is prepared to submit. And let's just talk about cohesion for a second. So one of the big things that we do more typically in round 2, although sometimes it happens in round 1, is we look at those supplementary documents that you are including in your application. So biosketches, facilities documents, human subjects or vertebrate animals, depending on what's relevant. And we look at those to see how well they are tailored to the specific proposal that the PI is submitting, right? Because what happens a lot of times is that those supplementary documents are kind of throwaways, right? They are recycled from other grants. They are cobbled together with boilerplate language that you've taken from a bunch of different places. And they're not necessarily supporting that overall argument that you're making for why you have the appropriate resources, including people, on the team for this particular project, right? So this is especially true in the case of biosketches. We see a lot of recycled biosketches that aren't tailored to the specific grant. And so it's harder to make that argument that, you know, this person is on the team for a very specific reason. This is the expertise and experience that they bring, and this is the role that they're playing on the project, right? So these are things that we look at in the second round to make sure that those supplementary documents are actually supporting the overall argument, the overall proposal that you're making for your research. So that's the full process that we go through with our PIs. And that's how their overall impact scores improve, right? We start with the resubmission strategy session. We develop a plan to respond to the critiques from the summary statement. And then we look at the big picture of the application and the overall argument you're making for why your research ought to be funded, why you have the right team in place to do it, and why your project is feasible. And then, only then, do we start getting into the fine tuning and polishing. And just remember that we're doing this over a 10 to 12 week period, right? So we're giving ample time to really think deeply about what's going on, to look closely at the application and think about how to, connect the dots for the reviewers and really present a strong application and communicate clearly, right? So all of those elements are things that you can use when you are preparing your resubmission, and kind of going through that process, I think will really help you improve your overall impact score if you do it with the type of care that is required when you are resubmitting. So, of course, if you want some help with that, if you want our help with that, we'd be delighted to work with you in a strategic review. And you can find more information about how to apply for a strategic review in the video description underneath this video. And again, we have been hugely successful with this process with the PIs that we work with. So that process that I just explained, the resubmission strategy session and the 2 rounds of review, has led to more than 80% of our clients getting a fundable score after they work with us, immediately after they work with us, I should say. And because of that, we actually offer a guarantee with our service. So if you do not get a fundable score on your next application, we will work with you for free until you do. That's how confident we are in the work that we do. So if that sounds interesting to you, please put in an application. We'd be happy to work with you on your next resubmission.